My fiancé called off our wedding after hearing my secret. Before we begin the story, make sure to subscribe to our channel and never miss more incredible stories every day. If you were capable of telling me the truth, there would still be a wedding. Daniel said it in the parking lot outside our venue with one hand on his car door, like he was too rushed to even ruin my life properly. Behind him, the white brick building glowed with string lights. Inside, somebody was probably steaming napkins for the reception I had spent 14 months planning. I was still in pediatric floor scrubs under my coat because I had come straight from a 12-hour shift, and I remember thinking how absurd it was that I had spent the morning calming a terrified child and the afternoon watching my future get canceled in a parking lot. Daniel, slow down, I said. Whatever your mother told you, it is not the whole story. He laughed once, sharp and cold. I saw the documents. The word documents dropped through me. For a second I could not hear the traffic. I just stared at the man who knew how I lined up my shoes before early shifts, how I drank coffee too hot, how I sometimes woke from nightmares and lied that I had only gotten too warm. He looked at me like I had conned him into loving me. I changed my last name, I said. That part is true. That part, he snapped. You testified against your own father in a criminal case, changed your identity, and never thought your fiancé deserved to know? Deserved. That word scraped something raw. I had imagined telling him 100 times, after the engagement photos, after the invitations, after his mother stopped studying me like a return item. There was never a right time to hand someone the bloodiest chapter of your life and ask them not to flinch. I was going to tell you. When? After we got married? After we had kids? After my family found out from court records? He was breathing hard, but not like a blindsided man. More like a man landing on a decision he had rehearsed. I did not understand that yet. I only knew my chest hurt and my hands would not warm up. He opened the car door, then said, "Don't call the venue. I already told them it's over." That was when I realized he had canceled us before I arrived. 3 weeks earlier, I still believed I was one conversation away from becoming an honest person. That sounds dramatic, but that is what hiding does. It turns truth into a hallway you keep promising yourself you will walk down tomorrow. Daniel and I had been together almost 4 years. We met when his niece came into the hospital with a broken arm, and he stayed in the room making bad jokes until she laughed through the pain. He had a steady voice, careful hands, and an almost embarrassing talent for remembering details. On our second date, he remembered I hated cilantro. On our third, he remembered the exact weekend I worked nights and showed up outside my building with soup and a thermos of coffee. When he proposed, it was simple. No flash mob, no photographer, just Daniel kneeling in my apartment kitchen while I stood there holding groceries and crying over limes and toothpaste. That was the version of us I trusted. Ordinary, patient, durable. The kind of love that could survive my quiet places. Wedding planning brought out stress I pretended was normal. Helen had opinions about everything, from flowers to whether my brother looked stable enough to sit near Daniel's law partners. Daniel usually smoothed it over with a smile and a "she means well," which I accepted because women are trained to accept that sentence like weather. Jade did not. "She doesn't mean well," my cousin said one night while helping me stamp invitations on my couch. "She means control." I laughed because laughing was easier than admitting Helen made my shoulders lock. She asked questions that sounded polite and landed like probes. Why did I have so little family on my side? Why had I never shown childhood photos? Why did my college transcripts list a different hometown than the one I usually mentioned? Daniel waved it off. "Mom likes details," he said. "She's intense with everyone." Then there was the pale blue folder on my nightstand. Inside were copies of the name change order, my old birth certificate, and one newspaper clipping folded so many times the crease had turned white. I kept telling myself I would sit Daniel down, open it, and tell him everything before we signed the marriage license. Then Helen started asking questions that felt a little too precise. I was born Nora Voss, and even writing that name now makes my skin go tight. When people imagine secrets, they picture affairs or debt or some glamorous betrayal. Mine was uglier and smaller at the same time. It lived in paperwork, in courthouse stamps, in the way my brother and I learned to scan every restaurant window before going in because our father could turn up anywhere after a restraining order expired. He was violent in the boring way, which is worse than people think. Not movie violent. Routine violent. Doors slammed off hinges. Plates thrown because dinner was late. My mother apologizing with split lips. Me learning, before I learned algebra, what kind of silence meant danger was still in the room. I do not tell people that part because it changes their face. They either pity you too loudly or become fascinated in a way that feels close to hunger. Daniel knew my father was not in the picture. He knew my mother died when I was 22 and that Eli and I were not close with most relatives. He knew I had panic attacks sometimes if a man shouted behind me in a parking garage. He did not know why. When I was 17, the state finally brought charges after a neighbor called 911 during one of the worst nights. I testified because my mother could not. She was too bruised to sit upright for long and too scared to speak without shaking. I remember the courtroom carpet, the smell of old paper, the way my father kept staring at me like I was something he had dropped and broken. I remember answering questions in a voice that sounded borrowed. After sentencing, one of the victim advocates told my mother that starting over was allowed. Not easy, not magical, just allowed. We moved counties first. Years later, after he violated parole and found our apartment once, Eli and I changed our last name. My mother had already filed for divorce before she died, and Bennett had been her grandmother's name. We chose it because it belonged to nobody who had hurt us. I told myself I was not lying to Daniel. I told myself I was waiting until I could say it without reliving it. Then Helen asked the question I had spent years outrunning. The first time Helen asked, she made it sound casual. We were at her house folding place cards at a dining table that could seat 12 without anyone's elbows touching. She wore cream slacks, diamond studs, and the sort of perfume that arrived before she did. Daniel had stepped outside to take a call, and Jade was in the kitchen pretending not to eavesdrop while opening a bottle of sparkling water. Helen slid a stack of escort cards toward me. You and Daniel still want the Bennetts listed with the bride's side? I looked up. What do you mean? She smiled, small and rehearsed. Only that I've seen your nursing license and some of the paperwork for the venue. Sometimes there are family names, maiden names, legal names. These things get messy. It was such a polished sentence that I almost missed the blade inside it. My legal name is Bennett, I said. Of course. She tapped a manicured nail on the table. I'm only thinking ahead. Churches ask questions. So do caterers. So do guests. Jade came back and set a glass down a little too hard. Since when do caterers run ancestry checks? Helen's smile tightened. I'm trying to avoid surprises. Daniel returned before I had to answer, and I did what I had done my whole life when danger wore nice clothes. I minimized it. I changed the subject. On the drive home, Jade stared out the window for a full minute before saying, she knows something. Knows what? That there's something to know. I wanted to tell her she was being dramatic, but my heartbeat still had not settled. 2 days later, Helen texted me asking for the spelling of my mother's maiden name for the wedding program, even though we were not listing deceased parents individually. 3 days after that, Daniel asked, too casually, why my brother still used Bennett if our mother had died years before. Then a week later, Helen handed me a venue seating printout with my hometown circled in pen and said, funny, I thought you grew up elsewhere. Each question alone was survivable. Together, they felt like fingers testing a weak spot in drywall. Jade told me to tell Daniel everything that night. I told her I would, right after I finished one more shift. Then Helen called my brother from a number he didn't recognize. The wedding died on a Wednesday in less than 11 minutes. Daniel asked me to come over after work because we needed privacy. I knew from the flatness in his voice that something was wrong, but I still went there thinking this was the conversation I had postponed too long. I even brought the blue folder. It sat on the passenger seat all the way to his townhouse like an accusation. Helen was in the kitchen when I arrived. That should have been my first clue to leave. Daniel stood by the island with both hands braced on the granite. Helen sat on a bar stool, spine straight, face composed, as if she were attending a board meeting instead of my execution. On the counter was a manila envelope, already opened. I asked for privacy, I said. You've had privacy, Helen replied. An extraordinary amount of it. Daniel pulled out a photocopy and held it up. My old name. The case caption. The state seal. Even from across the kitchen, I recognized the page from the hearing transcript. Tell me this isn't you, he said. My mouth went dry. It is me. But you said your father was gone. His voice rose. You didn't say you testified against him in a felony case. Because I was trying to tell you the whole story, not the ugliest headline version. Helen folded her hands. Daniel deserves to know who he's marrying. I turned to him, not her. Please don't do this with her here. He ignored that. What else don't I know? Did you lie on financial forms? Medical forms? Did you change anything else? The question hit me so hard I actually stepped back. No. God, no. Daniel, changing my last name wasn't fraud. It was survival. Survival from what? He said, and then when I hesitated, because I could feel Helen watching, collecting, his face hardened. See? This is exactly what I mean. I put the blue folder on the counter and opened it with shaking hands. If you let me explain. He didn't even look down. I can't marry someone who built our relationship on omissions this big. Helen stood then, soft and elegant as a funeral director. The vendors will need to be notified quickly. I stared at Daniel. He would not meet my eyes. Then he slid my engagement ring across the counter with 2 fingers. I learned that public humiliation is mostly administrative. People imagine a canceled wedding as one explosive scene, but the real damage arrived in invoices, voicemail, and silence. The floors called first, overly cheerful, asking whether I wanted to transfer my deposit to a future event. Then the venue manager emailed about cancellation terms because Daniel had already contacted them and stated there had been material dishonesty affecting the marriage. I read that phrase 3 times in the hospital break room until the words blurred. By Friday, people knew. A bridesmaid I barely knew unfollowed me without a word. One of his cousins posted a vague story about hidden characters surfacing before vows. An aunt I had met twice texted, "Praying truth brings freedom," which is what people send when they want credit for kindness without taking any risk. At work, I smiled through medication rounds while my phone vibrated with vendor questions I could not afford and pity I did not want. Jade came over that night with Thai food and found me sitting on the kitchen floor beside 3 unopened boxes of wedding favors. "Eat," she said. "I'm being defamed by stationery," I said. She looked at the place cards around me and exhaled. "Has Daniel called?" "No." "Texted." "He sent one message about returning his spare key." Jade crouched beside me. "Nora, listen to me. This didn't spread that fast by accident." I wanted to argue, but she was right. Helen had a way of leaking things without ever appearing to touch them. Daniel had a larger, louder family, the kind that called information concern while passing it hand to hand. The worst call came Saturday from the bridal shop asking whether I wanted to reschedule my final fitting. The woman's voice changed the second she realized I was the bride from the canceled Mercer wedding. I hung up and threw up in my sink. Eli came by that afternoon and stood in my doorway looking older than 25. "Did you tell him everything?" "No." He nodded once, not judging, just tired. "Then Helen told him the part that made you look dangerous." I wiped my face. How would she even know enough to do that? Eli set his phone on the table. There was a missed call from Helen on Eli's screen. The missed call would have been strange on its own. What made it frightening was the voicemail she left. Her voice was smooth, sympathetic, almost maternal. "Eli, this is Helen Mercer, Daniel's mother. I'm trying to clear up some discrepancies before the wedding. I think there may be details about Nora's past Daniel doesn't fully understand. I'm sure you'd agree honesty matters at a time like this. Please call me back." Discrepancies. As if my life were an accounting error. Eli had not called her. He restored the voicemail because something about it made his neck go cold. Helen had never met him without Daniel present. She definitely did not have his number from me. Did Daniel give it to her? I asked. "Maybe," Eli said. "Or maybe she found it wherever she found everything else." That sentence finally cracked something open in me. Up until then, I had been moving through pure humiliation, which is a terrible state for thinking. Humiliation makes you focus on proving you are not monstrous instead of asking better questions. But Daniel had confronted me with exact phrases from hearing paperwork. He knew the year of my name change. He knew my father's charge had been aggravated assault, not just domestic violence. I had never said those words to him. Jade came over again with a laptop, a legal pad, and the expression she used when somebody returns soup for being too wet. "We are building a timeline," she said. "I don't want to become a person who investigates her ex-fiancé's mother." "You already are that person. You just haven't admitted it." So we started. Dates of Helen's odd questions. The text about my mother's maiden name. The call to Eli. The Wednesday Daniel confronted me. The Thursday venue email showing he had canceled before speaking to me in the parking lot. I found 2 missed calls from a restricted number the week before. Eli checked the voicemail timestamp and froze. "What?" I asked. He turned the screen toward me. Helen's voicemail had been left at 2:14 p.m. Tuesday. Daniel had texted me at 2:19 asking if we could have dinner Wednesday, because he missed me. Jade tapped the table. She fed him the bomb, and he still played normal. Then I remembered one more detail I had ignored. The detail was stupidly small, which is why it mattered. 2 Mondays before the breakup, I had stopped by Daniel's townhouse unannounced after an overnight shift because I had left my charger there. He was at work, but Helen's car was parked outside. That was not unusual by itself. She had a key and opinions about how often his cleaning service should come. What felt wrong, in retrospect, was the state of his front office. Desk drawer half open, printer tray out, a stack of papers turned face down beside the keyboard. At the time, I barely glanced at them. I was exhausted. I grabbed my charger, scribbled a note, and left. Now, sitting at my kitchen table with Jade and Eli, I pulled up the security app from my building and checked when I had come back home that day. Then I searched my messages. At 10:43 a.m., Daniel had texted, "Mom's helping me sort old paperwork. Ignore the mess, lol." Old paperwork. Jade got very quiet. What paperwork? I knew before I answered. Background forms. Daniel had once asked me for copies of my nursing license and passport when we were filling out travel information for the honeymoon and the marriage license pre-application. I had emailed them from my laptop. That laptop auto-filled old file paths, and somewhere in the same archive folder had been scanned copies of the name change order. Not because I was careless, exactly. Because when paperwork becomes part of survival, you stop seeing its shape. The next morning, Jade came with me to the county records office on her day off. The clerk at the public window could not tell us much, but she did not need to. Name change orders in our state were accessible with enough identifying information. Criminal case summaries were public. Full hearing transcripts required a request and a fee. We paid it. While the clerk printed the form, I looked over the sign-in sheet on the counter and saw a name written 2 weeks earlier in neat blue ink, Helen Mercer. I felt the floor tip under me. Jade took a photo before the clerk turned the sheet over. "That puts her here," she said. It still did not explain how she moved so fast. Then, on our way out, my phone lit up with an email from Daniel's account. It had been sent to a coworker at 1:07 a.m. The subject line was one word: finally. For one bright, stupid second, I thought Daniel had written to me and mistyped the address. Then I saw that the email had been forwarded to my account from our old shared wedding spreadsheet login. The one he must have forgotten was linked to my inbox for vendor edits. It was only 3 lines long. She was hiding more than I realized. "Mom pulled records. You were right about the timing. I think I'm finally going to do it." Below that was a reply from the coworker sent 4 minutes later. "Then do it clean. Don't drag this into August." I read it twice before Jade took the phone from my hand. Who was that? I closed my eyes. Coworker. Marketing team. He mentioned her maybe twice. Eli swore under his breath. The email answered one question and opened 3 more. Helen had not just stumbled onto public records. She had actively pulled them and then given Daniel enough to weaponize. But somebody else had apparently been discussing timing with him before the confrontation. Not after. Before. I wanted to call Daniel and scream. Instead, Jade, who is wiser when angry than I am, said, "We don't confront him yet. We gather." So we gathered. I requested a download of the shared planning account activity. Daniel had logged in from his office at 12:58 a.m. and from his home Wi-Fi at 1:05. He must have been moving files or forwarding things when the email synced. Eli searched the coworker on social media and found photos from Daniel's firm holiday party. She was younger than me, bright smile, expensive highlights, the kind of woman Helen would call polished. That night, I listened to Helen's voicemail again and caught something I had missed the first 10 times. At the end, when she thought she had already stopped sounding performative, she said, very softly, "I won't let him make a mistake he can't undo. Not I won't let him get hurt. Not I'm concerned. A mistake." The next morning, I called the records office and asked whether anyone besides Helen had requested certified copies of my file. There had been a second request 3 days later under Daniel's name. Then the clerk added one sentence that changed everything. He had picked them up in person with another woman beside him. By then I was past crying. Every new fact rearranged the relationship in my memory. Jade came over with coffee and sat across from me while I logged into the apartment search site Daniel had once used on my laptop when helping his cousin move. His email autofilled. So did one saved search in a neighborhood 30 minutes from his office and nowhere near my hospital. Studio and one-bedroom units. Pet-friendly. Lease start, September 1st. I stared so long Jade finally whispered, Nora. I thought he was comparing rents for his cousin. Jade's mouth flattened. He was comparing exits. There were more. A text thread, half visible on his smartwatch backup that had once synced to the tablet we used for seating charts. Most of it had expired, but enough remained to tell the story. Coworker, you can't marry her out of guilt. Daniel, it's not guilt. Coworker, then why are you still doing this? Daniel, because it's easier than blowing everything up. Then later, 2 nights before the breakup, Mom found something. Maybe this solves it. Solves it. I could have survived being left by a man who had fallen out of love. It would have gutted me, but it would have been honest. What cracked me open was realizing my secret had not created the end of our engagement. It had been used to sanitize it. Daniel let his mother dig through the wreckage of my family because he wanted a morally satisfying exit ramp. Something cleaner than cowardice. Something he could point at and say, see? I had no choice. Eli read the messages and looked sick. He used what Dad did to us so he could avoid being the bad guy. I nodded, then laughed once in a way that frightened even me. And half the city thinks I deceived him. That afternoon, Daniel finally called. I let it ring twice before answering. I'm coming by Saturday for my things, he said. Your things, I repeated. And the ring insurance papers. Mom said. I cut in. Please stop telling me what your mother said. He went silent. I looked at the apartment search page still open on my laptop. He had only wanted an exit that made him look innocent. The worst part about proof is that it does not instantly make a decision easier. By Sunday, I had enough to wreck Daniel publicly. The records sign-in sheet. Helen's voicemail to Eli. The forwarded email. The apartment search history. The confirmation from the clerk that Daniel picked up copies with another woman beside him. If I laid it all out, people would understand what really happened. They would also learn the part of my life I had kept private for 12 years. Eli wanted scorched earth. They turned your trauma into gossip, he said from my couch, pacing with the agitation he got whenever our father came up. Why are you still protecting them with silence? I'm not protecting them, I said. I'm protecting me. Jade, sitting cross-legged on the floor with a yellow legal pad, looked up. Those are not the same thing anymore. That landed because it was true. Silence had once kept me safe. Silence had also let Helen define me first. Every hour I waited, her version hardened in other people's minds. Dishonest, unstable, secretive, possibly dangerous. People love a woman with a missing backstory right up until somebody offers them a sinister one. Still, the idea of saying it all aloud made my throat close. Not just the legal facts, the human facts. My father's handprint on the wall by our kitchen. My mother rinsing blood from a dish towel because she could not stand to waste anything. The way I had looked at a courtroom clock at 17 and wished to become someone with no name at all. Daniel texted that evening. Can we please handle Saturday calmly? I stared at the screen. Calmly. Jade leaned over my shoulder. He wants control of the setting. So we take it. An hour later, the venue coordinator called about the refund dispute. Because Daniel had canceled unilaterally, while most balances had been paid from the shared account, the manager suggested a joint meeting Monday afternoon to review who was legally entitled to what. Then clarity hit so hard it almost felt like relief. Neutral location. Documentation already expected. A reason for both Daniel and Helen to show up. Then Helen texted me before I could set the trap. Her message was almost elegant in its cruelty. For everyone's sake, I hope you won't turn Monday into a spectacle. Daniel has suffered enough. I read it standing in the medication room at work between 2 patient checks, fluorescent lights humming above me. Suffered enough. My fingers went so cold I nearly dropped the phone. Helen was not guessing. She was warning me that she already viewed the venue meeting as a risk. So I turned it into a certainty. I replied, I agree. We should keep Monday factual. Then I forwarded the message to Jade and Eli. By that night we had a plan. Jade organized the timeline into a single folder on her laptop with tabs labeled simply records, email, messages, refunds. Eli wrote out the dates from memory so I would not lose my place if I panicked. I called the venue manager and said I would be bringing someone to help me review documents because I was overwhelmed. She sounded relieved. Daniel confirmed he would attend. Helen inserted herself by email 20 minutes later, saying she would be there to support her son in a difficult legal conversation. I barely slept Sunday night. At 2 a.m., I sat on my kitchen floor with the blue folder open in my lap and finally read the old newspaper clipping all the way through instead of just checking that it was still there. It called my father a respected local contractor in the first paragraph and did not mention my mother by name until the fourth. Even then, she was only the wife. That clipping had always reminded me how easily people turn real suffering into a clean external story. Monster. Victim. Brave daughter. As if I had stepped into court glowing with courage instead of dissociating so hard I could not feel my own feet. At noon Monday, Daniel called. I let it go to voicemail. His voice was softer than before. I know this is ugly. Let's just settle the venue stuff and move on. At 3:30, I arrived with Jade and my folder. Daniel was already there in a navy suit like he had come from a client meeting. Helen sat beside him, pearl earrings, perfect posture, legal pad ready. She smiled when she saw me. That was when I knew she still believed she would leave victorious. The meeting started with contracts and ended with Daniel learning what kind of woman he had thrown away. The venue manager walked us through the cancellation policy on a wall-mounted screen while I sat across from Daniel with my hands flat in my lap. He would not look at me for more than a second at a time. Helen did all the talking at first. Nora understands, she said in that smooth voice, that certain disclosures altered the foundation of the marriage. I looked at the manager. Before we discuss money, I need one factual clarification on the record. Helen's eyes narrowed a fraction. Daniel shifted in his chair. I opened my folder. Daniel canceled this wedding before speaking to me in the parking lot on March 3rd. Your email confirms that. He also received information about my legal history from records his mother requested on February 18th. I placed a copy of the sign-in sheet on the table, and he pursued additional copies himself on February 21st, in person, with another woman present. Daniel's face changed first, then Helen's. This is inappropriate, Helen said. No. Jade cut in from beside me. This is documented. I slid the printed email across next. At 1:07 a.m. On February 28th, Daniel emailed a coworker, quote, Mom pulled records. You were right about the timing. I think I'm finally going to do it. I looked at him directly. Would you like to explain what timing meant? The room went still except for the faint hum of the projector. Daniel swallowed. Nora, not here. Here is exactly where you made it about my character. Here is where we finish it. Helen tried again. You concealed a violent family history from my son. I stood before I lost my nerve. I concealed trauma until I was ready to speak about it safely. Those are not the same thing. My voice shook once and then steadied. When I was 17, I testified against my father after he nearly killed my mother. Years later, after he violated parole and found us again, my brother and I changed our last name. Not to deceive anyone. To survive him. Daniel finally looked at me. Really looked. Then Helen made the mistake that destroyed her. She said, I did what any mother would do. Then Daniel whispered, Mom, I never told you to contact the clerk. Everything after that happened fast. The venue manager, who had been trying very hard to remain neutral, asked whether improperly obtained records had influenced a financial cancellation. Jade calmly said yes and offered copies of the timeline. Helen demanded our documents back. Eli, who had arrived 10 minutes late because of traffic and walked in just in time for the reveal, said, You should probably stop speaking. For once, Helen looked less polished than furious. Daniel followed me into the hallway when I stepped out to breathe. Nora, please, he said. I didn't know she went that far. I turned on him so quickly, he actually stopped mid-step. You picked up the records yourself. His mouth opened, then closed. I only wanted context. You wanted permission. He flinched. There it was, finally, the weak center of him, exposed without his mother's language to hide behind. He admitted he had been unhappy for months. Admitted his coworker had become someone easy to talk to. Admitted he had looked at apartments because he felt trapped by expectations, family, the wedding, all of it. Then he said the one thing that erased my last scraps of pity. When your past came up, it made everything simpler. Back inside, the venue manager informed us future communication would go through email only and that the refund distribution might require legal review because of the dispute and the circumstances surrounding the cancellation. Within 48 hours, Helen's friend at the clerk's office was placed on administrative leave pending an inquiry into records access. Word spread through Daniel's family, but not the way Helen had intended. Some doubled down, calling me manipulative for waiting too long to tell the truth. Others went very quiet, which is what embarrassed people do when they realize they helped amplify a lie. At work, I paid for it anyway. I was short with a resident during rounds and cried in a supply closet after a child's mother thanked me for being so calm. My manager gently asked whether I needed leave. I took 3 days and slept like somebody recovering from surgery. Daniel sent 2 apologies, each better worded than the last. I answered neither. Then a certified letter from Helen's attorney landed in my mailbox. By the time Helen's letter arrived, I was too tired to be afraid of paper. My therapist laughed, not unkindly, when I brought it in and asked if powerful people could keep trying versions of the same intimidation forever. They can try, she said. That doesn't mean you have to participate. Jade found me a lawyer through one of her clients. He sent back a clean response attaching nothing but truth. Helen's own texts, the record's timeline, the venue witness list, and a request that all further contact go through counsel. The threat stopped after that. Daniel asked once, through Eli, whether I would meet him for closure. I said no. Closure is a lovely word people use when they want access to your peace after helping destroy it. I mailed back the last of his things with tracking and kept the blue folder, no longer hidden under a book. It sits now in the top drawer of my desk beside my passport and nursing license, not because I enjoy what it contains, but because I am done treating my survival like contraband. The strangest part of healing was how uncinematic it looked. No triumphant speech echoing in my chest for weeks. No sudden glow-up montage. Mostly it was routine. Sleeping through the night twice in 1 week. Taking the long way home without checking every car behind me. Rebooking one tiny non-refundable piece of the honeymoon. A refundable train ticket up the coast, and using it myself in October. On the second morning of that trip, I stood on a cold hotel balcony with terrible coffee and watched fog lift off the water in slow white ribbons. Nobody was demanding anything from me. I have thought a lot about whether I should have told Daniel earlier. Honestly, yes. Not because Helen was entitled to the story, and not because love means instant access to every bruise, but because silence stops protecting you once it starts protecting someone else's comfort. I confused privacy with postponement. That cost me. Still, what destroyed my wedding was not my past. It was what Daniel and Helen did with it. One weaponized my trauma. The other welcomed the weapon because it saved him from saying the uglier truth.